techniques. This is followed by further continuation or advanced training in various methods of clandestine insertion and extraction methods by air, land, and sea, including underwater. Regional orientation and language training is a time-consuming and protracted process. Now, after this basic three truths about training of special forces, I would like to emphasize another very important aspect of special forces, that is man-machine integration. Here the question was raised and it has been debated that we will think whether to have the support platforms as integral to the special forces or we will get from outside services. I feel, and like it was mentioned by General Tej Pathak also, that unless you integrate them with the special forces, the common understanding of the SOPs, knowing the man in the cockpit, whether he will be able to take us to the mission or not, is very important, that we sit with him, we eat with him, we drink with him, and we enjoy with him. Only when we are a team, proper cohesive team, who have understanding of each other, then only this restructured organization will work. So I'll deliberate slightly on this point. The training methodology of Indian Special Forces, common to all three services, has more or less been the age-old tradition of practical training and common sense. Today, if we observe, our special forces are equipped primarily at the personal level of weapons and gear such as reliable body armor, good load-bearing combat kit, night vision devices, etc. Accordingly, their existing training level concentrates on building endurance, honing basic skills, and developing or practicing tactics mainly for direct action missions. As highlighted yesterday by Brigadier General Eyal, it is not just the combat operator, but the 80% support system of the iceberg which was shown down below the level, which makes this force unique and special. You can train an individual, that combat operator, as much as you want. You can keep having speed marches, you can keep having all that. But to what end? After that, if he doesn't have a proper support system behind him, that special capability won't come. In order to augment the existing capability of our SF, more specialized gear such as special operations, satellite communication, equipment giving the SF operators instant message capabilities, specialized platforms for mobility in operational areas such as fast boats, all-terrain vehicles need to be inducted. Discrete launch and recovery platforms such as midgets, special operations vehicles, high-lift helicopter, long-range transport aircraft are all still a long way from the inventory of SF personnel, and therefore the development of training and tactics on these equipment is lacking. These platforms need to become part of daily workup and training routine of SFs for effective man-machine integration. It is said that train as you fight and fight as you train. Any special forces personnel, in addition to his physical strength and endurance, also requires possessing extraordinary levels of skills and psychic profiles to be successful. The psychic or intuitive profiles of the SF soldier can only be developed if they are continuously trained and deployed in the circumstances they are required to perform. In wartime, SF men should expect to be isolated and surrounded by enemy forces as part of their working environment. To illustrate this, an exchange of message between SAS Patrol during Gulf War, that is first Gulf War, and their forward headquarters goes like this. SAS Patrol, surrounded from all sides by enemy divisions. Forward headquarters, good, you are obviously at the right place. Therefore, Sustained small team operations training under hostile conditions is a prerequisite for development of such profiles. In order to avoid overstretch by deployment on routine tasks and to maintain the special edge of these forces, it is essential that SF follow a three-team cycle concept, that is training, operations, and administration. This three-team concept ensures that the special forces are continuously trained to hone their skills and yet ready for operations without combat fatigue. Coming to the fourth cardinal principle of management of special forces training and HR issues, this relates to the HR issue. Humans are more important than hardware. How to find the right guy? In order to train, individuals need to be selected. What kind of men want to get selected as special forces? Why would a young sailor comfortably settled in his parent branch of the Navy volunteer to serve in special forces that requires tremendous personal investment and sacrifice? High pay is generally not the clear answer, as there are several other branches which provide equal good remunerations, if not better. Each volunteer's motivation is different. The initial stimulus may be nothing more than adrenaline addiction. Some strongly believe in giving their best to their country for personal patriotic reasons. Others view special forces services as the ultimate test for determining whether they had the right stuff. Still others value the esteem with which their being a commando is seen by the general public. The sense of being elite is quite intoxicating, especially in the youth. In order to get selected and undergo the most demanding physical and mental grueling, one must have belief in self. Because life's battle don't always go to the stronger or faster man, but sooner or later the man who wins is the man who thinks he can. The endeavor of SF selectors and trainers is to remain on lookout for such men of character and skill. It is a well-known fact that JCOs form the backbone of any good military unit. However, at least half of the SF personnel recruited are lost within the first 5 years of their full capability because of injuries, lack of promotion prospects, and the opportunities offered in the civil street. A para-SF soldier profile would be similar to the Marcos profile in the Navy, as shown. A sailor joins the Navy at roughly 18 to 20 years of age and needs at least 2 years to learn the basic skills required to serve in the Navy. Then he undergoes almost 2 years of training to qualify as a Special Forces man. It takes another 2 years for combat exposure, specialized training, interaction with other special forces, and higher qualification examination before he is fully groomed into an effective operator. So, finally, after 6 years of his service, he becomes a reliable and dependable Special Forces operator who can be part of a team to deliver results with little fear of failure. And this when presuming that the sailor will opt for Special Forces immediately on the first available opportunity. Since a sailor would have an option to leave service after 15 years, and thus for last 2 years, he invariably moves out of the operational unit to prepare for outside world. Therefore, it will be seen that despite all the investment in terms of training and experience, all that has been achieved is just 7 years of service as a reliable SF operator who can undertake serious operations. Considering that there are little incentives for the experienced SF man to continue, The brighter ones who meet the high standards confidently join the civil street, and the others with less desire to experiment continue and rise in the SF organization. Ideally, as we would like to retain the talent, but it's hard to convince or stop SF personnel who voluntarily joined the force and endured the additional effort, stress, and danger to become a special forces operator. As far as an officers are concerned, in the higher echelons of the services, a traditional skepticism about special forces exists. Their elitism, independence, apparent informality, and special role out of mainstream operations in large-scale warfare all make them a caste apart. This factor can act as an intangible blocking mechanism to officers' later promotion. In August 1985, Dan Daniel, chairman of the US House Armed Forces Readiness Committee, had suggested that SF have always been principled to the SF have always been peripheral to the core philosophy of military. They have historically been the target of mistrust and suspicion, and their capabilities and requirements are poorly understood. If they are to become truly effective, they must have their own intellectual and professional core around which they can coalesce and mature. Coming to recommendations, this training, presently each service is separately carrying out training and education of their SF service in specific tasks. This training is conducted in their respective schools and partially through inter-service SF institutions. It would be an ideal situation if a joint SF structure is evolved and put in place, as most of the advanced and practicing SF nations are doing. However, considering the present politico-military constraints, a beginning can be made by adopting interim measures in small steps, such as undertake comprehensive study of the existing SF training structure and methodology in the three services and identify areas of common skill development such as communication, navigation, marksmanship, fieldcraft, basic parachuting, survival, and ISR techniques. Start conducting basic training for all three service volunteers, including officers, together in order to strengthen inter-service camaraderie and encourage jointmanship. The benefits of this joint training will far outweigh initial investment in terms of time and resources. The basic training can be followed up by individual service-specific training with a focus on their respective core competencies. Thereafter, the advanced joint training capsules need to be identified and worked out, both for the ORs, JCOs, and officers, and responsibilities assigned to suitable service headquarters for conduct of specialized joint training such as leadership, language, intelligence, weapons, EOD, that is explosive ordnance disposal, diving, and combat freefall techniques. The focus of the training should shift to enable small SF team survival and sustenance and operations in hostile conditions. The composition of these teams should invariably remain below 8 personnel, where each member is an expert of one of the primary skill and cross-trained for a secondary skill, namely communications, demolitions, medicine, and weapons, etc. The ability to launch and recover these small teams by support platforms and the associated training to do so needs to be augmented in a time-bound manner. This is the biggest weakness we have in our SF capability now. That is, we are not trained in a collective, integrated manner. Presently, the Army and Navy draw volunteers for the SF units from the already recruited manpower, whereas Air Force has started direct recruitment from the civil street. Both have its advantages and disadvantages, which need to be studied in detail vis-a-vis the practices existing in advanced nations and work out a model suited to Indian SFs. In the interim period, measures to retain the highly qualified and vertically specialized SF personnel need to be adopted. Some of them could be: get the right guys. If required, introduce psychological screening and more scientific one during the selection process. The psychologists of the SAS recruits, they look for men who on the test are above average in intelligence, assertive, happy-go-lucky, self-sufficient, not extremely intro or extroverted. They do not want people who are emotionally stable, mind you. They do not want people who are emotionally stable. Instead, they want forthright individuals who are hard to fool and not dependent on others. As brought out earlier, in the higher echelons of the military service, it has become common to deride the capabilities of special forces and deflate their ego, which results in a conflict of cultures. The one dedicated to intellectual abstraction and the other expressing itself by action rather than talk. There is a need to bridge this gap and encourage their elitism. In the advanced nations, it is if a useful SS operator decides to stay in service beyond his mandatory tenure, he is offered certain incentives in terms of pay packets or free education for children, etc. There is a need to look at the terms and conditions for introduction of similar incentives for retention of experienced and talented SF personnel. The promotion prospects of both the men and officers need to be improved. In the worst of time, SF service has been a career killer, which means that those who choose to stick with it must do so out of pure dedication. If we are to develop a true SF professional, the services must reward their service in an equitable way. In order to raise their present training levels, to give them proper SF edge, there is a pressing need to induct and integrate state-of-the-art equipment with the SFs of three services, especially launch and recovery platforms. In conclusion, I would like to say that the governing principles of Special Forces truth, that is, Special Forces cannot be mass-produced, competent SF cannot be raised post-emergency, quality is better than quantity, and humans are more important than hardware, should not be lost sight of whilst trying to manage training and HR policies of special forces of our three services. Thank you.
Sorry, I forgot to mention one thing of perhaps some interest to you. One of the things I was keen, because it's in my field of interest, is what I call a nuclear commando. Simply because I think you're going to see situations developing in the neighborhood where we would need specialized special operations forces who are capable of inserting themselves into, say, Pakistan or somewhere where there's a loose nuke kind of a contingency, or the possibility where some nuclear materials for radiation diffusion devices have been leaked to some extremist elements, for these to be intercepted that particular option to be preempted, etc. And that is a very specialized task. It really cannot be done by the normal SF. Something like the Americans have something called NEXT, nuclear explosion teams, that are already there actually in Pakistan trying to map and locate their nuclear assets, and in a contingency try to neutralize them. We should, I think, seriously think of having such a unit, but it'll have to be all officer, is what I think, in terms of the kind of capability, intellectual and otherwise, that you'll need, because they'll be handling complex technologies for detection and for neutralization of whether weapons, whole weapons, or of the nuclear materials, etc. It'll be an all-officer kind of outfit, wherein you'll have to build in the adequate reward structures and so on. I'm not quite sure how it will work out in practical terms, but there is such a need. And this would have to marry up with the kind of language skills, whether in Pashto or Sindhi or something, because one thing is clear, in terms of being able to operate best in a milieu like Pakistan's, Israelis or the Americans and all the rest of that caboodle is going to be identified very fast on the ground. Indians have the obvious advantage, if only we build up the skill sets to deal with the contingencies. Simply because we are in the front line, those other countries are not.
We're open for questions.
I'm Squad Leader Ravi. I'm looking after Garud from Air Headquarters. My question stems from a paper that was put forth by Lieutenant General Chandrasekhar, retired of course, who says that special forces need to look at new set of skills. In the emerging net-centric warfare scenario, what are the kind of new skills that you would envisage special forces to look into?
Talking about in the net-centric warfare, you're talking about what special skills are required. Have I got your question correct? See, the way I look at it, that net-centric warfare based on technology is just a tool. For a person to be aware of the environment, appreciate the correct course of action is a capability that he's got to develop. It's not a skill, it's a capability that he's got to develop. That comes with exposure and that comes with experience. Other side is, we talk about net-centric warfare. We are talking. I don't think today a country has a platform or experimented with the tools that are there. We are looking at presentations and forming ideas. Once you experience it, everything doesn't run as per the presentations that were shown. There are glitches. The manufacturer is not showing you the glitches. Once you experience it, you will carry out mid-course corrections. That's all I have.
Sir, I just wish to make one small comment, sir, after the things that I've heard. Some things were said about the conversion of battalions and raising of battalions and other stuff like that. So what I want to speak on this issue is that what has gone under the bridge has gone under the bridge. I think we need to realize that. And we have a situation here where a number of SF battalions have been raised. And I think they'll find their footing in the near future because I feel that they're equally bright and it will take them some time. I think the greatest challenge that we need to focus on, and also the think tanks, that is the journals, the need that they need to portray, is firstly to find us the right mandate. Now, we have the same mandate and the same tasking. We are used in the similar manner as infantry. So, there are no different parameters for you. So, definitely, you lose your respect. What we need to do is have a different tasking. We need to look outwards. Do we have the political will or the military will to do that? Do we have the will to all join together? Do we have the will to create a special operations command in which we'll have the SF, the airborne? Definitely they will undertake special operations. They need to be part of it. The NSG, the Marcos, and everybody. I think that is the issues which should be troubling us. And these small issues of a battalion converting or a battalion which has to be raised, I think, sir, in due course of time, everybody will reach the same level.
I just mention a few things before I pass on to Commodore Dang. The question is, yes, what has happened has happened. You can't put the clock back. But what has been emphasized, we're not even here trying to put the clock back. When you're talking about mandates, what Mr. Bharat Karnad said, let's look at a joint special operations command. Slight distinction from a joint special forces command, no, joint special operations command. That's one part of it. The thrust has all been, let's club all the special forces together to optimize and maximize training and equipment for us. That's what we are talking, and that's exactly what you said you were looking at. Other aspects, the mandate will come. The political will can come without your asking for it. Just remember that. This is a country which has exhibited very hard options at times in earlier years. So let's not bother too much about the political will. It's a question of organization, structures, and capabilities. Once the challenge is there, the political will be there. But capacity building, capability building takes a long time. That is what we should address. I think more you want to say.
See, that point was made of conversion and raising to emphasize the point of, on that one of the truths, that is SF forces cannot be mass produced. So that was the point. So that has been emphasized. Now, whatever suggestions, training suggestions which have been made, that is basic training and advanced training, if we put them through, obviously the standards will come up, but we have to put them through. The main distinction between special forces and the general thing, I feel, is that the point which I was harping on in very small team operations, where the people are individualistic. In the teams of 4 or 8, they are left behind somewhere in very difficult circumstances. They should be able to take their own decisions and act, rather than looking up at the platoon or company commander asking him what to do. That is the main thing. That conventional thinking has to be broken, and individualistic thinking has to be brought into mind. That is the main thing. That unconventional part has to come into them.
Another aspect, well, a lot of water has flown, you can't put the clock back, but definitely an effort must be made to enlarge your intake base. Instead of limiting the intake base to one regimental center, to improve your quality, enlarge your intake base from all over this army. That is a thing that I think needs a bit of reform. That's my view. You can take your call. Thank you.
Sir, I fully agree with your comment of the enlarging the intake base. I'm Major Santosh from 21 Para. The present recruitment process for the men of the parachute regiment is, I feel, though it has lived the test of time, but don't think it's, we have a scope of improvement. Firstly, we don't have volunteers. What we have presently are the personnel who want to join and do service, and they are put through the parachute regiment training center and then inducted into the units. Though after some probation and selection, after they go through the selection procedure. However, we need to convert this parachute regiment training center into a parachute regiment selection center. Instead of we recruiting the individuals right from the civil street, we need to take personnel from the armed services, volunteers, and then laterally induct them, select them, and then induct them into the units. I feel this would be a more prudent way of selecting volunteers than recruiting people from civil streets and then training them to become special forces soldier. Thanks.
I think the Indian Army Special Forces are maybe the few in the world that their intake is based on a recruit who's just done his basic training and he comes into the, where is the aim of recruit training is for the guy to take his position in a rifle section. Now you, in that 52 weeks from a raw person, you're training him to take his position in a special forces battalion. I think there's something wrong. Logically, people who got about 2 to 3 years of service and then they volunteer, you select, train them. I think that would be a better foundation than to build it. I totally agree with you, what you said. Okay, last session, to summarize, I would thank both the speakers on excellent presentations. I just want to highlight 2 points. What Mr. Bharat Karnad said about a joint special operations command. It's got an entirely different connotation, delve a bit deeper as far as a joint special operations command. Special forces command has got a different connotation, can have a different connotation than a joint special operations command. There's one aspect of it. Ponder over it. Other is what Commander Dhankar said about HR management. Well, in a lighter vein, I would say promotion prospects in the Army, I don't think so, are so bad because of one battalion. That's 9 para, there are 3 of us, generals sitting out here. So possibly can't be so bad. But definitely, HR management does require a lot of serious thought. Thank you. Summarize the proceedings of the last 2 days. There's something, sorry.
We thank the speakers and we thank the chairperson, and may I request the chairman and managing director and editor-in-chief of SP Guide Publications, Mr. Jayant Baranwal, to kindly present the mementos. We thank Mr. Bharat Karnad. Thank you to Commodore R.S. Dhankar.